Terry, with your father, if it's okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your father and why he would be featured in the Bondi story?
Everybody here? Well, Todd, we go back to, I think I've got to go back to the year 1910 when two newly married young people living in Glebe decided to start a family and thought since my grandfather was very fit, conscious, he'd move out to the beach. And they did that. They moved out. My grandparents moved out in 1910 and set up home in Simpson Street, just up near Dixon Park, and of course they were there for the rest of their lives. My dad was born in 1914, and three uncles followed soon after, and they were introduced very quickly into the Bondi way of life. Grandfather had them, even in those days, jogging down to the beach each morning, summer and winter, swimming. They went to the local schools, went to Welling Street to start with, and then to Waverley College, and all became members of Bondi Swimming Club, surf clubs, and they were Bondi people.
And you've mentioned the surf club. I'd love to riff on that a little bit. The surf club was a really big part of your father's story and remains a really big part of your story and the next generation's story as well. Can you tell us a little bit about your dad's early interactions with the LSC?
That's the Bondi Surf Club.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't be here, either with my son or my granddaughter, if it wasn't for Bondi Surf Club, because Dad met Mum at the front steps of Bondi Surf Club. And they were both involved in Bondi Surf Club for the whole of their lives. My father in the 1930s met Mum, married up here at St Anne's Church, moved into Francis Street, where we all grew up, were born and grew up there, and their involvement with Bondi was lifelong involvement. My father became an honorary life member of Bondi, was on many committees, involved in much of the movement of the Bondi Surf Club. My mother was involved with the Ladies Auxiliary, so this was a real Bondi lifestyle going back a long way.
And there's a particular period where your father's work and your mother's work was significant, which was around the post-war period, and in particular a publication called The Doings. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And for those who don't know, what was The Doings?
Well, to deal with The Doings, we've probably got to go to New Year's Eve, 1939. The war had just started. Bondi Surf Club were having a party, so were North Bondi Surf Club, and many of the members were getting ready to go out to war. So at midnight we had the members from Bondi and the members from North Bondi both marched towards each other carrying their flag. They met in the middle, and then the band played "Should Old Acquaintance Be Forgot." They joined the flags together and tied them together to show that Bondi would always be united wherever they went. And that was the start of what was called the Doings, because when a lot of the soldiers went off to war, many were rats of Tobruk. That's why we have the rat house down there, or Brook House, as you probably know it. Many of the Bondi boys were writing back and they were asking, how's the beach? What's going on? What's doing? So they put the Doings together and got it out around to the various war zones. So Bondi people were kept in touch with what was doing in Bondi. And of course what happened, at some of the war zones, not only in Tobruk, not only in the Middle East, but also in the Pacific. They took the Bondi flag, and that was the flag that was carried down that particular night, and they took it to all those zones. They used to fly the Bondi flag when a lot of the soldiers were feeling down and out, wanting to know what were we fighting about. Well, we're fighting for places like Bondi, and the flag still exists today.
It sure does. For anyone who hasn't seen it, the flag is actually next door in the Bathers main hall there. It's at the back, it's been preserved by the Maritime Museum. It's a beautiful thing to go check out. We kind of jumped out of order, but I'd love to go back to talk about Black Sunday as well, another sort of major event that your father was connected to and that you can give us some insight into. For anyone who hasn't heard of Black Sunday, Terry, what was this day?
Black Sunday was February 6, 1938, when the greatest surf rescue in world history took place. It was at that day, and it remains so today, when 250 to 300 people, about 100 yards from where we're sitting right now, were washed off a sandbank by 3 mammoth waves that came into Bondi at about 3 o'clock on that Sunday afternoon. Now, the surf that day was quite dangerous. In fact, the lifeguards were going to close the beach, but they didn't. There was 30-odd thousand people on the beach at that time. The 3 waves came in and they were mammoth. Some history says that a sandbank collapsed. That's not in fact the case. What happened was that the waves came in quick succession. They took a whole lot of people who were on the sandbank across into the channel and then took them out to sea. So it was chaos immediately, and the Bondi lifesavers went into action, I suppose the word, and started the greatest surf rescue operation that had been seen anywhere.
And how many people were pulled from the water that day? Oh, apologies.
It's estimated that there were 250 to 300 rescued on that day. Bear in mind that on that sandbank that day, a lot of the people weren't swimmers. So they were sucked in, taken over, and in the rip taken out to sea. The rescue operation itself took about an hour and a half. But if you can imagine the situation that transpired, is that a lot of people were families on the beach, and next minute someone's missing and they're on their way out to sea, including children. There was chaos, screaming and so forth. So the lifeguards took over very, very efficiently, and they immediately got the crowds back. They set up rescue bays on the sand. They then put into operation the Bondi reels. Many of you probably don't know that the iconic surf reel was an invention of Bondi Surf Club. And they also put into place various surfer planes, which were located up in Baz McDonald's store that was here, got them out and started to swim out, got groups of people holding on whilst the reels were coming out and then pulling in one at a time. Of course, there was chaos going on in the beach as people suddenly saw their relatives, husbands, etc., wives, being carried in unconscious. They thought they were dead. But they were put down into the various bays and worked on and brought back to life. There was a visiting American doctor at the time, a very well-known doctor, I can't remember his name offhand, but he made a statement to the press at that time that he'd never seen such devotion to the preservation of human life as he saw on that day. nor did he ever think that he would see such coordinated devotion to the preservation of human life. There were 5 that died that day, many who were in very a state of unconscious, semi-conscious, were taken into Bondi Surf Club, and they were treated and resuscitated there. And it was at that time, then, of course, press started coming from everywhere. The lights were flashing, all sorts of things were happening. And it's quite important to understand at that time that the press wanted to know who were the heroes of Bondi. Who were these heroes? And a fellow called Carl Jefferson was the Bondi Surf Club captain. And my father was there with various other senior lifeguards, and they agreed between themselves that they would make a statement to the press, but it would be a one-off statement. And the statement was, there were no heroes here today, we're just doing our job, we save lives on Bondi Beach. That was the story that went out. And at the same time, it was made that there would be no hero awards given, but one award was given to Bondi Surf Club.
What a story, and what a storyteller too. Thank you, Terry. You've mentioned Carl Jefferson, Jeppo, who also appears in the Bondi Story Room. Can you tell us a little bit? You've got a long-term family connection with him as well, is that fair?
Well, Jeppo was the mayor of Waverley. Jeppo is, I call him Jeppo because I've called him Jeppo since I was a boy. Jeppo was, and my father, Bill, were mates from teenage days in the 30s. They were mates right up until Jeppo's death. And their connection was a love of Bondi. They both were just lovers of this beach. They, along with a whole group of Bondi people that came through in those days, their life was devoted to this beach. And probably the best way that I can explain the relationship between Jeppo, who would come to our place for dinner at nights and so forth, and he was a great mate of Mum's. In fact, he was groomsman at the parents' wedding. Jeppo would come in, always had tripe with white sauce. I remember it, because I hated it, because I had it. When he died, and the little chapel by the sea here, my father delivered his eulogy, and the eulogy was on the boat. That's my grandson, 5th generation Bondi. Thank you. The eulogy that Dad delivered was a very emotional eulogy for him because they were tight. They were good mates, brought up here, common interests and so forth. However, Dad did relate to the parishioners, or to those that attended, a conversation he had with Jeppo, because they used to both have a surf and then they'd walk the prom together. And it was a conversation he had not long before Jeppo's death. And Dad and Jeppo were standing at the rail, and Dad looked out over the beach and he said, "Aren't we lucky, Jeppo, to have such a beautiful beach? We've really enjoyed our beach." Jeppo's response was, "Bill, aren't we lucky to be Australians?" It probably gives some insight to the way these people were brought up and the way they felt about this place.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I've had the privilege of meeting with Terry many times over the course of the Bondi Story Room project. And every time I feel like I've walked away with a list of another 10 people, if not more, that have been allocated straight to our research team. In fact, I started to dread meeting with Terry because we always walk away with a massive to-do list. But one of the great stories that, that came from one of our chats was that of Kev the Head. Would you mind telling the group a little bit about Kev the Head and why Kev the Head is worthy to be in the Bondi Story Room?
There's some good friends of Kev the Head sitting in here right now.
Excellent.
Kev Brennan was the most cheeky, outrageous, school wagging Bondi kid. He died at a young age. He died at 25. But he was probably the most talented board rider that Bondi has ever seen. He came from a very traumatic home life. I've known Kev, I knew Kevin, he died in 1975. We're still talking about him, God bless him. First met Kevin when I was about 9 or 10. He's a couple of years younger than me, and he smoked at that time. I first met Kevin down at the South End, South Bondi Surfboard Riders Club, and even at that time he was showing his prowess as a board rider. Kev Brennan had a lot of troubles in his life. There were mentors at South Bondi that tried to assist him. He had a shocking home life, but he found a great love in the Bondi surf. Kev was amazing with what he would do, and I think the boys would agree. He was probably the most talented surfboard rider that Bondi has produced. He used to surf a board that he was too heavy for him to carry. That was the old type board. And I could go on with a lot of things about Kevin, but I'll just relate one thing, which I think he should be remembered for. We Bondi people have taken it up with a lot of with a lot of writers who've written stories or told stories about Kevin. We've said, sport, get in line. You weren't even born when Kevin was around. So don't start telling everyone about a Bondi kid who did it tough, but was quite brilliant, and they back off. So if you want to say anything about Kevin, you can pass it by us first. Now, Kevin in 1965 was 15. There was a board riding competition on down here. There was juniors and seniors. Kevin, 15, went into the juniors. He was streets ahead of anyone in the juniors. He wiped the floor with them. He came out and then entered the seniors competition. Now, in that seniors competition, with the likes of Midget Farrelly, he was the reigning world champion at that stage. Nat Young, I don't think he was world champion at that time, no. But was coming world champion, became world champion. There was the top cream of Australian board riding was there, and there was Kev on, I think it was a borrowed board, or probably one he stole, anyway, God bless him. But he took on the seniors and wiped the floor. This kid wiped the floor with the world champion. He became an overnight sensation. Up and down the coast they were talking about Kev, and we have a painting of Kev at that time with the biggest grin on his dial. It was the happiest day in his life. Bondi kid making good at Bondi.
And you can see that painting as well as Kev the Head's story in the Bondi Story Room for anyone who wants to check it out. We've got...
I'm not sure you want to look at his head.
We've got a minute or two for questions if anyone has a burning question for Terry.
If it's not too sensitive to ask, he died at 25. What did he die from?
He died, unfortunately, the Bondi surfing scene was
Played.
Loaded.
well, no. We were larrikins,
Yeah.
but we'd never been exposed to the drug scourge, and unfortunately got into the surfing scene as it did with lots of things.
Yeah.
Kev was a fellow that could handle himself on the street, but once you got west of George Street, he didn't quite know what went on in life. He got mixed up into that scene for a short period of his time, got onto drugs, and went down. He died of a drug overdose. But I will say in relation to Kevin, that was 1975. About a year before, I sat with Kev out on the grass at the south end, and we spoke about the different colours that the sun sets over the headlands at Bondi. And he also said to me, he loved it best when there was a big offshore wind blowing and a good surf coming in, and it used to throw a tube would come over, and the foam would come over and create a rainbow along Bondi. And he used to say he felt at one with the ocean at that time.
We might, one more.
Terry, you've been hanging around here a bit longer than me. I've probably racked up around 50 odd years around this stretch of sand. With all due respect, it's probably a year or two older than me. Is there a golden era that you can pick out during that time, that where you went, this is the best time?
Sure. That's beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I was probably, I think, alive to what was going on as a young Grammy. That's, I hadn't reached my teenage years yet. And much to my father's horror, I wouldn't join the surf club. I wanted to be with the board riders up here. So that was a great family argument about that. But let me say, I saw evolving up there, starting in the 50s, so forth, the surfing fraternity. And there was a mateship and a tribeship and so forth that went on there. We had our own humour, almost our own language. But the leaders that were there, the mentors that were there, Barry, Magoo, Bluey Mays and so forth, Tony Rule and so on, and they were older than me. And I would, Andy Cochran's another who was just out here recently. I could watch these guys and get involved and just be amazed. And I thought that was, to me, an amazing era because surfing was just starting.
Interesting you say that, because the trickle-down effect. Bluey's son Brad, it was a great beach lifeguard as well as a great surfer of his time, a shaper. There was some pretty rough crews around, and you had to earn your spot in the lineup in those days. And I remember Brad took me under his wing, and all of a sudden I noticed there was a bit more room in the water for me once Brad was mates of mine. So it goes through the years and through the generations, and it's that drip down effect.
I do believe that Bondi's always been in a state of evolution. But I'll say one thing, if I can.
Go for it.
There was a wonderful writer. I don't think that was it. There was a wonderful writer called a Bondi girl called the Yoni Huntsman. And she did she observed Bondi life. And she observed people growing up here and so forth. And she did a thesis, which was for her doctorate, which was later turned into a book. And the book was called Sand in Our Souls. And that book examined the connection that the saltwater people have with the beach. And it said, it went further, it said there's an emotional connection that goes further. There's a spiritual connection. There's a spirit. That was passed on. I personally believe that's been passed on for thousands and thousands of years. Because we're doing here today what was done here maybe 30,000 years ago. We're gathering, we're mentoring, we're having festivals, we're teaching the young, we're at one with the water. To me, that's something that so much trickles down, that's passed on. Because I do believe the true Bondi people do not consider themselves to be owners of this beach. We're simply custodians, and we pass it on to the next generation, and if possible, in a lot better way, in a set than as we have it.
I think that's a beautiful note to finish on. I'm sorry, we do need to wrap that because we have